Welcome back to Splunk Training. In this session, we'll discuss about Splunk indexes and how data are getting staged within an index. Okay, let's get started. So the last session we discussed about what is an index and how it works. So basically, an index is nothing but a folder structured in my indexes where we can create multiple indexes based on our application requirements. Right? For each and every individual application, it's recommendable to have a separate index so that it will be easier for us to identify a data within that particular index. Right? So when we talk about index, we should understand what are all the components, what are all the things which will be there as part of your index. Right? So let us look into it. Whenever we create an index, right? Whenever we create an index, either by Splunk or either by us, right? So whoever is creating an index in a Splunk, then there will be some folder structures will get formed. As you know, so there will be a default uh, location of my Splunk index or right Splunk. I should go to the home directory and where lib under Splunk I see different indexes. And if I create any custom index, those get stored here itself. And but again, these locations are customizable. If you want to store it somewhere else, we should give a path. We will discuss that little later. Okay, let me take an example which is created by Splunk installations. So let me consider internal DB, which means as and when we have a index in my Splunk environment, this is the folder structure we see, right? So this is the folder structure. So here we have DB, here we have core DB and third DB, right? Basically, as and when we create an index, we talk about we talk about the data retention policy and data retirement policy, which means like how long I should hold this particular data within my Splunk environment. And once you specify that either by age or either by timeline or either by size, then what I have to do, whether I should delete the data from Splunk or should I somewhere archive it to store for some time and later point of time if we need that again we have some options to get back those data, right? So this is how Splunk index plays a major role in order to hold a particular data. As the name itself indicates that, see here you can see these are all the different bucket system we have within an index. When I say bucket system, it's a folder structure. I'm just taking an example of internal DB index, right? So here, as you can see, we have hot bucket, warm bucket, cold, frozen, and hard bucket, right? So as the name itself indicates that this part, whenever the data are getting stored from applications, right, which will be in the form of logs that will be converted into events, right? Those events, the recent event gets stored under hot bucket, right? So as you can see, so the very recent data gets stored in hot bucket, and as these data are getting older, then of course we'll have to have some mechanism. By default, Splunk will take care. But if you still want to define by ourselves, we can just either we can set the size of the data so that probably after 1 GB of data which is accumulated in hot bucket, then probably that whatever the data which was exceeding the 1 GB space, then that will be rolled to warm bucket, right? So which means as and when the data is getting aged after some time, right? So this particular data, I mean the whatever the data which was older, those data are getting stored under warm bucket. And again, the same concept as the data are getting older or if it occupies some time, whatever the duration which you have mentioned, then automatically the data gets rolled from warm to cold. This is the default behavior of Splunk. Okay. Now, these combination we can do, which means like hot, warm, and cold bucket size or the timeline, these can be defined in our configuration. The job of my Splunk is to delete the data as and when it completes the time duration or it completes the size which is mentioned by us. So based on that, once these specifications, based on this configuration, once this retention policy or the size are met, then Splunk will automatically delete the data. This is the default behavior. So exactly it does delete, it does follow first in, first out mechanism. Right? Afterwards, Splunk says my default behavior is to delete the data which are in the form of first in, first out. Do let me know if you want to have this data somewhere else, right? So that I'll just have option to archive this data. I'll put it in some remote locations or wherever you need, and probably after some time, probably later 1 year or 2 years, if you need that, so again I have an option to get back the data, right? So this is something called as frozen bucket, which means, see, if we can look at here, I don't see frozen buckets here, right? Because by default it will not create, it has to be created by us. Okay, so which means whatever the data which I don't want to have to search for some time, but I may need it in future. In that case, it is preferable to define frozen configuration so that data will not be searchable if the data, as long as the data will be in frozen bucket. But if you need it in future, we don't need to necessarily know or to get all the data. Instead, let's say probably I just need a data which is 5 years old, and the two I just need a particular file, right? So definitely I'll have some information about about the event data which I'm looking for. So based on that, I can just get into this frozen bucket, right? And I'll just consolidate the data which resides in this frozen bucket. That frozen data, which will be in a zip format, I'll just extract it, and those bucket details, we will copy into Thawed Bucket, right? So once the data are available in Thawed Bucket, then this will be searchable, right? In short, a very recent data gets stored in hot bucket, and after the data retention policies or after our time duration, whatever we mentioned, as the data are getting older, the data will be rolled from hot bucket to warm bucket so that a new data will get into picture. So that it will be very much easier to maintain the very recent data, and so that it can be available for user, right? So that will help in searching. And once the data are getting older or based on the space which is occupied under warm bucket, that particular data will be moved to cold bucket. It all depends on first in first out manner. And this is the default behavior of Splunk to maintain all these three buckets. Once the time duration or once the size of the volume which we mentioned as part of these three buckets, then the default behavior of the Splunk is to delete the data. And once it crosses this limit, Splunk will say my default behavior is to delete the data and just delete it. But again, it will give me an option to save this data somewhere else. So there, frozen bucket comes into picture. Whereas the data which we'll be storing under frozen bucket, these are all not searchable, not searchable. If you want to search back, again, we'll have to extract the relevant data by logging into this bucket, and we'll have to extract those buckets into Thawed Bucket. Then Thawed Bucket will help us in storing the data. Right? Okay. Let's understand each and every bucket in our internal DB, and later we'll create new one. All right. See, I don't see hot and warm, but I could see cold and hot. So which means hot bucket, warm bucket, and frozen buckets are not present in the in my underscore internal DB. Of course, this is the expected behavior. Okay. As most recent data are handled by hot bucket and warm bucket, these hot and warm buckets will be captured under DB bucket. Right? And here you will see something called as DB and hot version 1 and version 1.2. Correct? Let's see. Basically, this is the DB which will have the raw data. You remember what is raw data? The raw data will be which will be from whatever the data which we are reading, the log from the applications. This refers to raw data, right? Okay, we will see that. But before that, let's look into DB, right? So this is something called as this is the Linux time format. So basically, we just have to extract this timeline, and we will see how to convert this as to human readable format. So we have something called as epoch converter, so which will help me to find out the data. All right. See, this is the timeline which I'm referring now, right? So which means this is the time frame which is which can be seen under this folder, which means this particular folder has created on this particular date. As and when this particular data are getting created, as and when this particular data are created, a relevant bucket gets created automatically by Splunk. So this is the internal DB, and the first uh, bucket or first data, first folder gets created on this particular date. And as I mentioned, very recent data gets stored under hot bucket, right? So this is nothing but a hot bucket. And once it has the sufficient data, once it has occupied a sufficient volume which was defined by us, then Splunk automatically create a folder similar to this, like as no, warm bucket with version. Right? As of now, we don't have much data. It has not met the volume which we have defined. So that's the reason we just still see hot bucket details. But once you start storing the data, definitely in this folder, you will see a warm bucket details as well. Let us see when does this particular hot bucket was created. See, you can see this is the .tsidx file. Right? Let us see uh, what is the time it has created. So I'm just copying this one and I'm just pasting here. Let's see. So this was created on Friday, December 16, 2022, which means by default, the first place will be DB, and with the, under which we have something called as hot versions. So which is created on December 16th, and let us see when this particular it is getting in place. Let us see when it is created today. Do you see, do you see my function? It starts creating multiple TS-IDX files. What is this TS-IDX file? I just mentioned this is a TS-IDX file. This is like a index file, which means which will have a reference to all the data. For example, if you have 100 uh, sheets of your book, then this TS-IDX file is the first front page which will have a references to your each topic. Okay, so whenever and similarly the raw data is a place where actually your data resides here. Your actual data resides here. So when somebody is searching with the help of Splunk, then the first request will come to the recent .ts idx file based on the timeline. See, if I am looking for some data today, for example, what I'll do, I'll just log into my Splunk and I'll just try to search internal DB. Let's see, because as we are looking for internal DB content, I'll just say I'll just search with index is equal to underscore internal. Index is equal to underscore. Okay. See, I'm just looking for today's data from last 24 hours, which means as I'm looking for today's data, so it will cite how exactly search will happen. As and when we hit this search, then the request will come to this TS-IDX file. So if I'm looking for today's data, then it will find the appropriate or the most relevant timestamp with the search time whatever we have given. and it will come to the respective .tsidx file, and where it will have a reference and the to this raw data, right? So that the first request will be evaluated based on the timeline. So it will not scan for all the TS IDX data. Instead, it will just look for the timeline which we are searching for, and it does check the timeline which was mentioned here. So accordingly, it will just get into that TS IDX file, and TS IDX file will have reference to the raw data folder, so that it will check for the data which are stored here. Right? So basically, this will store the data, and where we'll have a front-end references here. So if you go to second page, okay, you can see this kind of process, right? So similarly, we can try to relate this indexes, right? And the same kind of warm bucket also gets created, and it does also follow the same folder structure and same behavior, right? So this is about the data which are available under DB. So the DB folder will take care of hot and warm buckets. Of course, there can be multiple hot buckets and there can be multiple warm buckets. Right? Okay. Now we don't see you must be thinking we don't see any thing called as frozen bucket also, right? So we just discussed hot bucket and warm bucket resides in DB, and we have hot bucket, but I don't see anything in frozen bucket. Okay, let us see how to create a frozen bucket. So what I'll do, let me create a new one. I'll just go to settings and I click on option of indexes. So these are the default indexes which will come as part of your Splunk installations. So as I mentioned, this is the default index. So if user does not specify any index details during data onboarding, then Splunk will automatically consider this index as a default index, because data should not go anywhere else, right? So that's the reason we use a main index as a default one. All right. Now I'm creating a new index. So let me try to create with text. Okay. So this is my index name. Now we have something called as home path. When I say home path, by default, all the Splunk indexes get stored under this location, right? Home path, this is Splunk where live Splunk, right? So if you don't specify any customized path here, then Splunk will consider and create the new index in this location. So similarly, cold path and start path as well. So if you don't specify anything, it will come stored here. But let me keep it simple. Let me store. Let me create this a new index under this location. So hence I'm leaving blank. Okay. This is the picture here. You see max size of entire index. Please understand max size of entire index, which means the data, as I mentioned, this will be taken care by Splunk, right? So the combination of hot, warm, and cold will be taken care by Splunk. So the maximum the maximum size of entire index refers here 500 GB. Again, this can be customized, which means if I give 500 GB, right, or 50 GB or whatever you give, if you just give 5 GB, okay, once the data accumulated up to 5 GB, which means within this 5 GB, it plays a role of hot bucket, warm bucket, and cold bucket. So once that is done, then it will delete the data. Please understand, it will delete the data as and when it crosses 5 GB. Of course, it can be customized. You can give in terms of GB or TB, whatever. In my case, I'm just giving 5 GB of data. As and when if I insert 5 GB data into my indexes, so this is my capacity which I'm giving here. After 5 GB, data will be getting deleted. Now, Splunk is giving an option, hey, if you don't want to delete this data, but if you want to archive somewhere, now you can have something called a frozen bucket. Right? How to assign this frozen bucket? Here it comes into picture. And before that, we have something called max size of hot, warm, cold bucket, right? So this is how the data transition will happen from hot to warm and warm to cold. Basically, here we have mentioned auto, which means we have given this option to Splunk to decide the data roll from hot to warm and warm to cold. But again, these can be customizable by referring some values. For example, if I just mention some MB, and if I just say 20 MB, right? If I just mention 20 MB, which means for each and every 20 MB of data accumulated under hot bucket, then this particular whatever the data will be there in hot bucket, that will be moved to warm. And similarly, after 20 MB of data from warm to cold, right? So these transitions will happen. For now, I'm just selecting auto, right? So let it take care. All right. Now coming to frozen path. So as I mentioned, if you want to archive some data after 5 GB, see, this is the data retention policy I'm giving. It means hold this data till it reaches 5 GB. Now, after 5 GB of data stored, I want to archive it. So it is it's always recommendable to keep your. Let me create new one, something called as frozen. All right, I'll just give this part, right? So that the data, once it reaches 5 GB, the data will be accumulated here. Now, we have something called app. So, we will be creating our indexes as we have not specified any path. The default path will be Splunk home where lib Splunk. Right now, this particular app, whatever app, the app sections we see here, this will decide the structure, right? And this will decide the copy of data, right? We see whenever we see index gets created, and if you want to see the definition of these indexes, here I should mention where exactly this has to be defined. Somewhere this configuration should get defined, right? These configuration details which I'm planning to store. So we have many options here. So I'm just storing in Splunk search and reporting app. We will see what is the significance of this one, right? And TS IDS retention policy, we will see that in later. But now let me just click on save. Now the new index got created. If at all we are good, we should be able to see one folder which is of today. Refresh, yeah, I see a test index which is created today. Let me double click and see this is the folder structure cold DB. As of now, we don't have anything data model no, and third DB, right? And why frozen bucket is also not created? Because it has not met the condition. What was the condition? When the data exceeds, when data started accumulating and when it reaches up to 5 GB, then another folder gets created called frozen, right? And again, once we have a frozen data, if you and whatever the data will be there in that bucket, it is not searchable. And if you want to search back, we should put them in a star bucket, right? Now, let us understand. Yeah, see, this is the create type, and we don't have any hot bucket assets because we have not ingested any data. Correct. So this is the structure. Now, we had also mentioned the definition of these indexes. Correct. That we will see. So where we can see here. Let me just blank. UTC because I'm just in the definition where these indexes are created, right? So it will be a definition under UTC apps as we selected search. So let's search and this is customizable. Yeah, see, this particular index.conf has updated up to date. Okay. There is something called the app serve. This is created by Splunk. and the test one have created. Look at the difference. Here, this is the cold path, SunDB test cold path, and you see cold to frozen directly. Please understand. See that if you could see the difference here, this frozen thing is not there in apps of bucket. Yeah, index configuration. And we have enabled data integrity control. We are not enabled. We will see them later. And even if you remember CS IDX reduction, that policy also we have not enabled. It is disabled. Let us understand home path. So home path refers is a combination of hot and warm bucket. So that will be there. See here. What is the maximum size in MB? It is saying I've just given 5 GB, whereas it has taken 500 GB. Correct? So once the data reaches 5 GB of volume, then it will store the data into this bucket. I mean, in this folder, right? And the data which will be stored, this folder can be it will be in a non-readable format or non-searchable format. If you want to read back, again I can put them in a third bucket. Do you understand this one? So if you create a multiple, as and when you create any indexes, those indexes configuration will be there. And again, if you want to change these locations, you can always go ahead and change. All right. Okay. What if, let's say, I don't want to, rely on this particular 5 GB. I want to archive the data, or I want to archive the data after 90 days, right? So, which means basically here we are given the size, and we have also option to give some timelines as well. So either the case, as and when if it reaches 5 GB, then data should get frozen and archived, and it should get stored in frozen bucket, or whichever comes first. Or if I want to archive the data as soon as we complete 90 days, right? In that case also we can create it. I mean, we can archive the data based on the timeline. How to do that? We have something called as frozen timestamp. Yeah, let us see. Uh, okay, see here you can see. So the frozen time stamp in second, which is referring to 90 days. Right. So basically, this particular configuration will help us so that to my index, so that see either I'm okay to archive the data when it reaches 5 GB, or even I'm okay to archive the data as soon as it completes 90 days. Whichever comes first, then Splunk will automatically do these changes, archive the data into frozen. I mean, or whatever the folders or whatever the remote location which you have mentioned. Right. So this is how Splunk indexes work. Correct. So in this session, we talked about the data, what is an index, and what are the data aging policies, right? So how data are rolling from one bucket to another bucket, and we also created one index called test, and where we have mentioned cold path, home path. Home path refers to hot and warm bucket, cold path, then hard bucket, and also frozen timing period, which means have basically here we are giving two options. Either if this particular the combination of hot, warm, and cold bucket exceeds 5 GB of volume, then it will archive the data under this folder. Else, if the time duration exceeds 90 days, then it will archive the data and store it in this location. Whereas here I have not given any cold to frozen, which means in this case this will not, right, this will not archive the data. So which means as and when it reaches 500 GB, it will delete the data. What will happen if I just give this configuration here? For example, so this is the app serve index. Here I have mentioned frozen time period in seconds, where I have given 90 days. In this case, will the data will be archived? No, because I have not given this config. I mean, where exactly it has to archive, where exactly this particular data should get stored. This thing I have not defined under this index. Hence, the data will not get archived. I'm just showing you the difference. So this is the perfect configuration to store the data once the data are getting released after exceeding 5 GB or after exceeding 90 days. Whereas here, as I have not mentioned the cold to frozen directory details under this index, the data will not get archived. Right? Hope this helps. So in the next session, we'll discuss about some configurations, and based on that, we'll see. All right. Thank you.